When she stepped onto the graduation stage, no one even wanted to utter her name. But within just a few minutes, everyone would be unable to forget it. No one could understand what Nora Winter was doing on that stage. She was wearing a simple white cotton dress with old ballet flats that had worn-out soles. Her hair was tied up haphazardly, and she hadn't even put on makeup. Among sparkling beaded dresses and custom-made jackets, Nora didn't just look simple, she looked like someone who shouldn't even be there. The graduation ceremony host grabbed the microphone and, with a silence that pierced the entire hall, said, "Sorry, you're not on the speaker list. Please step down." It was as if someone had mistakenly called in the janitor. The gazes in the hall were cold at first, then they began to melt with mocking warmth as they looked at Nora. But no one asked why. No one questioned why the student with the highest grade point average, the young woman who had been the star of the class for 4 years, was being denied the chance to speak at the ceremony. Only whispers echoed among the crowd. What's the janitor's daughter doing there? Nora slowly took one step down after another. She straightened her back, but with every step, the childhood traumas inside her resurfaced. This was supposed to be her proudest day, but everyone judged her based on where she came from. Outside, her mother Elena, just off a hospital shift, was watching the ceremony on a borrowed coat, hiding her nurse uniform underneath. She squinted and found Nora in that crowd. In a room full of people shining in luxurious fabrics, Nora's plain dress was a silent but powerful protest. It wasn't a sign of belonging, but a challenge. And Elena understood that with one glance. She didn't care about what the crowd was saying. To her, Nora was still the girl who cried herself to sleep on that night shift, but woke up the next morning to finish her homework. In the hall, the elite students picked up their phones, mocking Nora for her poor girl bravery in attending the ceremony. Photos were taken, and social media posts with sarcastic captions began to emerge. The hashtag against poor style spread quickly, and a few students openly mocked her. "Looks like even janitors' kids are taking the stage now," said Louisa Kruger in her bluestone dress, her voice carrying to the back of the hall without a microphone. Those who heard Nora's name turned their heads one by one, and mocking laughter spread across the room. Then, Eric Schultz, the heir to a massive holding company who was sitting in the front row of the hall, stood up. His massive build and flashy attire made him easy to spot as he walked toward Nora. With a mocking expression and a shiny phone in his hand, he said harshly, "Someone like you shouldn't be taking up space here. That dress is an insult to this place." Nora was silent. She only held her head high and met his gaze. But inside, something shook. The achievements she had earned through years of hard work were being disregarded, all because of a dress. Eric leaned in closer, and with the false confidence given by alcohol, he whispered his venom. "What's a janitor's daughter like you doing on this stage?" The crowd fell silent for a few seconds. Then, laughter erupted from the audience. It was turning into a nightmare. Nora sat in the front row of the stage, holding a small award plaque, but everyone was waiting for her to fall. "Are the backup students sitting here in this section?" one person mocked. "Or did she come to clean the stage?" A girl looked at Nora's shoes and loudly said, "I wouldn't even go to the trash in those slippers." The laughter grew louder and louder. But Nora didn't move. She just gripped the plaque a little tighter. When the moment came for her to take the stage, a female staff member, sharp-chinned, dressed in a dark blazer, blocked her path. She showed her the list. "You're not on the official speaker list. Please go back to your seat." The microphone strapped to her shoulder made her voice echo throughout the hall, almost as if she wanted the sound of shame to grow. Nora paused for a moment and took a deep breath, but her face remained expressionless. The woman coordinator leaned in and whispered, but her voice was still amplified by the microphone. "You're not one of us. The stage is not your place." Laughter started from the back, and the front row clapped in approval of this humiliation. And then, the doors opened. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the hall changed. The sound of dark-colored shoes moving from the back to the front echoed. The security guard stepped aside. As the lights bathed the man walking through the door, everyone turned their heads in his direction. A man in a gray suit, his eyes as cold as steel, David Lorenz, stepped into the hall. At just 25 years old, he was managing one of the world's biggest energy investments. But to Nora, he was just David, the only person who had fallen in love with her intelligence, not her past. The room held its breath, and David walked directly toward Nora. David Lorenz's footsteps crushed the mocking laughter in the hall. In that moment, the room turned into a theater stage. The play stopped, and the masks fell. The elite guests, uncomfortably shifting in their luxurious chairs, quickly realized who the newcomer was. Every stitch of his gray suit was custom-made, and his expression was as sharp as a decision. His eyes seemed to say, "That's enough." He wasn't just Nora's fiancé. He was one of the most influential investors in the world. And tonight, he had no intention of staying silent. Before Nora could even understand what was happening, David cut through the crowd and walked directly toward her. His face was soft, yet firm. Without saying a word, he extended his hand. The moment Nora's fingers touched his palm, the hum of the hall came to a halt. "You're not leaving," David said, his voice neither shouting nor whispering, but sharp enough to be heard from every corner. "If this stage was set up for honor, then you should be the only one standing here." Shocked waves rippled through the hall. Coordinator Miss Langley tried to cover the microphone, but it was too late. David's voice had already traveled through the entire hall. David continued, never taking his eyes off her. "Grayson Investments has been the main sponsor of this ceremony for 3 years. This hall, the scholarships, the student programs, all of it was made possible by our funds. And as of now, if Nora Winter doesn't return to that stage, no more of our money will ever flow here." Not a sound was heard. Even the dean stood up, but when he looked into David's eyes, he couldn't find the courage to speak. Natalie von Bergen, sitting in the back in her glamorous emerald dress, sank deeper into her chair. The girl who had just made insulting remarks toward Nora on stage couldn't utter a single word now, because David hadn't forgotten her name either. "I'll get to you too, Natalie," David said, with a quiet calm that cut through the room. "In the last 4 months, you've tried to contact me 29 times. Emails, calls, invitations. But this was your true intent: to alter the speaker list, to sabotage a scholarship student's success. Yes, I have the messages and the gifts you paid to the sponsor committee." The hall erupted. Whispers, gasps of disbelief, eyes turning toward each other. Natalie's face turned bright red. Her friends began to distance themselves from her. David didn't back down. He pulled out his tablet and showed the emails Natalie had sent to the committee, the donations she made to Claire Voss's event committee, and documents proving that Eric Schultz had spread false rumors to try to overshadow Nora's academic achievements. With every accusation, the hall grew quieter. "This is no longer just about Nora," David said. "It's about the reputation of this school. And if justice is not served, I won't hesitate to share this with the public." Miss Langley's hand trembled. The dean, without being called, grabbed the microphone. His voice cracked, his face pale. "Our school must pay the price for this mistake," he said, bowing his head. "Miss Winter, your right to speak has been reinstated." And he paused for a moment, then continued. "A disciplinary process will be initiated against those in the event committee." Nora looked at David for a moment. There was still hesitation in her eyes. All the insults she had silently endured for 4 years had now exploded, but revenge wasn't what she was after. She just wanted what was hers. She nodded silently. Then, she turned toward the stage with the microphone. She still held that small award plaque, but it was no longer just an award, it was a badge of battle. David didn't back down. He stood a few steps behind her with his support, a quiet confidence. The crowd turned their heads toward Nora. For the first time, they were really starting to see her. That worn-out cotton dress was no longer a symbol of shame, but a challenge. The atmosphere in the hall had changed, anticipation. And as Nora stepped up to the microphone, she breathed in that air. "My speech was supposed to be about value," she began, her voice shaky at first. But then it grew stronger. "But before coming to this stage, I learned not what my value was, but what it wasn't." Her eyes shifted toward Natalie. "I'm not a last name. I'm not a label, a brand, or a connection. But what I do know is this character is not measured by a credit card limit." A murmur began in the hall. Some people clapped. Some were still processing what was happening. But Nora's voice became clearer. "My mom always used to tell me, if people want to silence you, it's because they're afraid of the power of your voice. So today, I won't stay silent here." And in that moment, the stage was no longer just a stage. Nora's words didn't just hit the stage, they hit the very souls of the people in the room, especially those who had spent 4 years making judgments based on her last name or shoes. never even bothering to look her in the eyes. Now, they fidgeted. Some lowered their heads. Some rolled their eyes, but mockery no longer felt safe in that space. Because Nora's voice was like a light piercing through the thick armor of arrogance. "This speech is not just for me," she said, her voice echoing back from the ceiling. "It's for my mom, who works 2 jobs every day. The woman who wakes me up with hands smelling of bleach at 5 a.m. to send me off to school, but who herself is turned away from the ceremony hall." The cameras shifted to the outside screen. Elena's tears were no longer of shame, but of pride. One of the audience members loudly cleared their throat out of discomfort. Julian Adler, sitting close to the stage, known for his nose-upturned attitude, pulled out his phone and began typing. "The show has started," he tweeted. But just then, Iris, David's security advisor, quickly approached from the back and snatched the phone from Julian's hand. "This device is temporarily considered evidence," she said. Julian tried to object, but David's gaze was enough. As Nora scanned the crowd, the old fears inside her were one by one stripped away. It was clear she was no longer alone. Several students in the back rows stood up. Some were on scholarships. Others were simply unwilling to stay silent. One girl, rubbing her forehead under her black cap, spoke in a shy but firm voice. "I'm on a scholarship too," she said. "And I shouldn't have said I was lucky not to look like Nora. I understood that today." It was a chain reaction. The first crack had appeared in the walls of the false order. Claire Voss, with her usual haughty demeanor, stood up. "This is not about class discrimination. It's about aesthetic standards," she said. "The institution has an identity. If everyone dresses like this, elitism is destroyed." At that moment, David's voice cut through the room once again. "Is your identity luxury? Then your character must be imitation." First, silence. Then a wave of quiet laughter spread through the hall. Claire's eyes widened. For the first time, she felt the unraveling of the influence she had held. Nora stood tall at the microphone. She hadn't changed her speech, but each word now felt like a stone. "Today we graduate, but not just from this school. I've graduated from staying silent. Now I speak." At that very moment, another door opened. The press was allowed to enter the hall. Cameras filled the space. The ceremony was being broadcast live, but now the official media was involved as well. David's team of advisors handed out press kits filled with documents. Emails, donation receipts, screenshots, all elegantly bound in folders. The evidence of the institution's tarnished reputation now in the hands of journalists. The dean took the microphone again, his voice now more steady and careful. "What has been done to our student Nora Winter is unacceptable. The foundation of this school is built on success, not privilege. And now we must take action to cleanse these foundations." He then turned to Dr. Felicia Langley. "Your position is hereby terminated." As whispers grew in the hall, Natalie von Bergen suddenly stood up. Though she tried to sound confident, panic was evident in her eyes. "I'm not the only one. Everyone knew. The committee made this decision together. Why am I the only one being punished?" But she was now alone in the room. Even those who had laughed with her were avoiding eye contact. She had been the first domino, and everyone now wanted to stay standing. "Reputation is not earned by a name," Nora said, turning her gaze to Natalie. "But it can be lost with one." David walked up to Nora. He didn't pull her off the stage. He didn't step back. He simply stood silently behind her. With his strength, but more importantly, with his respect, he showed that he was with Nora. The cameras in the hall kept rolling, but Nora's stance was no longer just a protest, it was a call. When the speech ended, it wasn't just the scholarship students who stood and clapped. Some of the children of wealthy families even began clapping with their hands joined in embarrassment. Maybe for the first time, someone without money had truly taught them something. But for Nora, this wasn't an end, it was a new beginning. Because tonight, she wasn't just thrown off the stage. She had stepped out of the rotten picture of a broken system. As the ceremony broke up, a space opened up in the crowd. Nora was walking through it no longer alone. Each step she took was a step on top of the disappointments she had buried for years, the neglect she had endured, the nights she had secretly cried. David was one step behind her, ready to be her light, not just her shadow. The noise in the hall had quieted, the press had wrapped up their filming, and the shock was slowly settling in. But the real confrontation wasn't going to take place out here, it was about to happen behind closed doors, in a room. The dean invited David and Nora into a private office. There were a few security officers and a representative from the ethics committee temporarily assigned to the meeting. On the table were documents detailing Natalie and Claire's interference with the scholarship committee, recordings of the rumors Ethan had spread, and Langley's emails. Among all those cold, digital files, Nora's hands still trembled, but not from fear. As justice drew closer, she felt an odd emptiness inside. This is what I've waited for all these years, but why do I still feel like something is missing? She wondered. David sat down beside her, looking at her not like someone who knew her, but like someone who truly saw her. What they did to you wasn't a mistake. It was a planned exclusion, but you're still trying to push it down inside. Let it out, feel it, he said. His words cut into Nora like a knife. I got used to staying silent, David, she said, her voice hoarse. The more I spoke, the more I broke. That's why I stayed quiet. But tonight, for the first time, I broke and I wasn't silenced. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. The door opened, and a small woman in a dark green coat walked in. It was Elena, Nora's mother. Nora's mouth parted slightly. She had never expected to see her inside. May I come in? Elena asked, her voice almost a whisper. I couldn't wait outside. Without hesitation, Nora stood up and embraced her mother. The years of longing, the weight of injustices, all the silences between the two women were shattered in that embrace. David bowed his head, respecting the sanctity of that moment. As he watched them hug, one sentence passed through his mind. This is real victory. I'm so proud of you, Nora, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. You've even given me courage. Nora smiled. You've always been brave, Mom. It's just that no one noticed. After that special moment, the disciplinary process officially began. The dean announced that Claire and Natalie's connections with the school had been suspended, Langley's employment was terminated, and a thorough investigation would be launched into the students who had been deliberately removed from the speaker list. But even amidst all these words, Nora's eyes remained distant. These people are just now realizing what they've lost, she thought to herself. But what I've gained isn't just justice. I now know who I am. When the meeting ended, Nora and David quietly walked out. As the night's coolness settled over them, David took Nora's hand. I've got a question, he said suddenly. Before all this, when no one was clapping for you, when you were this alone, why didn't you give up? Nora paused. She turned her face toward the night. Because in a world where everyone's afraid of staying in the shadows, someone has to light the way. David's eyes turned back to Nora, filled with admiration. And you became that light. Meanwhile, Natalie, quietly slipping out through the back door, was in her own corner, nervously checking her phone. But this time, she wasn't seeking praise, a title, or a new connection. She was just looking for a way to escape. But it was too late. The school's lawyer was already on her trail, and the media was already making headlines of the stories that had destroyed her reputation. Claire, under pressure from her family, was sent abroad, while Ethan's family was trying to suppress the crisis to save his post-university career. But in this story, there was only one winner, and that winner was still wearing the old ballet flats. The next morning, the campus was silent. Just a few hours ago, it had been a battlefield. The stones had shifted, and the identity molds that had been in place for years had cracked. But now, only the wind was rustling the leaves, and Nora Winter was sitting alone on the grassy field. She still held the plaque given to her at the ceremony. In one way, it was something to be proud of, but in another, it was like a symbol that ached every time she looked at it. Everyone had clapped, everyone had said, well done, but the wound inside her had not yet healed. She took a deep breath. She thought about yesterday. Natalie's face, Langley's voice at the microphone, David's determined steps. They were all still ringing in her ears. But all of that had happened. The real question now was, where would Nora leave this story? Just then, footsteps came from behind her. The sound of footsteps was familiar now. It was David. As usual, he wore a grayish blazer and held a slim black box in his hand. The sun caught his hair, making it gleam slightly, and for the first time, there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. The strong, self-assured man was now about to touch the most vulnerable part of his heart. Are we getting back on stage? Nora asked with a slight smile. This time, for a more special audience, David replied, extending the box. Nora raised her head. Their eyes met. From the box, a simple yet elegant ring appeared. It was a classic design, but the stone in the center had meaning, a sapphire that glinted lightly in the light, just like the sparkle in Nora's eyes, determined yet fragile. "I bought this ring before you," David said. "Not for the ceremony, the crowd, the company, or the prestige, but because I love you. But now, I have a bigger question. Nora, will you walk this story with me?" Nora paused. She brought her hand to her mouth. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she didn't let any fall. It took time for someone who was used to building walls in the face of love to gather the courage to tear them down. "I still can't imagine myself in this world," she said. "Being with you sometimes makes me feel like I'm not being myself. Everyone looks, comments on my clothes, my speech, my past. And you're so high up, David. I'm not used to being that high." David shook his head. "It's not about rising up. I'm walking with you, down here." Our story begins on that sidewalk, the night you leaned against the window waiting for your mom to come home. We wake up to the morning, lying under a street lamp, falling asleep with a book in your hand. "I'm proud of your past, Nora, because that past made you who you are. And I love you." Nora closed her eyes. She took another deep breath. The silence lasted for a few seconds, but for David, it felt like an eternity. Then, Nora extended her hand, slipped the ring onto her finger. "I love you too," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But love isn't enough. I'm a voice now, a step. And I want this path to be one that others can walk to, not just for our love." David looked at her. He smiled. "Then we'll walk it together. And we'll put signs along the way, together." At that moment, a staff member came rushing from the far end of the campus. "Mr. Lorenz," he said, "there's a call from Grayson Investments. Your press statement has made headlines nationwide. The board meeting is calling you urgently." David turned to Nora. "Whatever you say," he said. "Today is not a day for decisions, Nora. Today is just the day for the first step." Nora stood up. "Then let's take the first step together." And together, they began to walk. Their steps were silent, but the echo of them was strong enough to be heard from afar. 1 year later, another graduation ceremony was being held in the largest hall on campus. But this time, everything was different. The ticket checker at the door was smiling, the guests' outfits showed diversity, and most importantly, there was a name on the podium rising on stage: Nora Winter. She was no longer the girl in the plain cotton dress. But still, as she stepped onto the stage today, she did something special. She wore that worn-out white dress from last year's ceremony again. She still had on those old ballet flats, this time as a symbol. Because today, that dress was no longer a symbol of humiliation, but of transformation. Among the hundreds of people standing and applauding in the hall were not just scholarship students, but the board members sitting at the front, the professors, and the sponsors. When she stepped up to the podium, silence filled the room again. But this time, the silence wasn't out of fear, it came from respect. "Last year, there was a voice on this stage that told me, 'You can't speak here,'" Nora said. "But I don't hear that voice anymore. Because my own voice has become so powerful that it drowns out anyone else's echo." Applause erupted from the hall. But Nora raised her hand slightly and continued, "This speech is not just about making peace with the past. This speech is about building a future. I'm not standing here just for myself. I'm speaking for my mother, for the students waiting for scholarships, for the outcasts, for the invisible ones." On the screens, a short video of Nora's story was shown. A photo of her mother, Elena, working in hospital corridors, a black and white image of David handing Nora the ring. The moment Natalie was removed from school, Claire Voss's apology letter. All these moments were no longer just history, they had become lessons. There was a quiet pride in the room. But the most powerful moment came when David stepped onto the stage and walked up to Nora. He pulled a small document from his suit pocket. "Today, we're not just making a promise to the new graduates. We're making a promise to a new system," he said. "On behalf of the Grayson Foundation, we are pledging to provide full scholarships every year to at least 50 low-income students at this school. And the name of this scholarship will be the Nora Winter Scholarship." Tears filled eyes. The applause never stopped. Some students in the hall were crying because they saw themselves in Nora. Elena, sitting in the back, looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. Without saying a word, she simply lowered her head. It was her way of saying, "Everything in my life is complete now." Nora took the microphone one last time. "Last year, on this stage, I was told, 'You don't belong here.' Today, I answer, this stage doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone whose worth is unseen. And I'm no longer just belonging to this stage. I own my own story. At that moment, the room erupted in applause. When she stepped down from the podium, David was there to greet her. This time, there was no ring, no proposal. Just a simple, sincere sentence. Nora Winter, walking with you is enough for me. Nora smiled. I'm not walking anymore. I'm running. And together, they walked toward the backstage. The doors closed, but the echo remained. Because Nora's voice had spread not only through that hall, but to the world. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Because sometimes, one voice can change the world.